Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at the world of Guinness World Records. More specifically, we're going to be looking at some of the craziest ones.
Yeah, some of the more bizarre ones.
So the article that we're going to be diving into today is actually called Pasted Text. You know, it's an article that's really kind of a fun and lighthearted exploration of the weird thing.
The unusual things people dedicate themselves to.
But beyond the kind of surface level of just the sheer absurdity of these records,
Yeah.
you know, I'm interested to kind of get into the why. What drives someone to push boundaries in these really peculiar ways?
That's the real question, isn't it? I mean, it's easy to laugh and be like, wow, that's crazy. But like, you know, what's the root? What drives us to even want to be recognized for some of these things?
Right. Let's start with a record that definitely makes you kind of think about pain tolerance. The most clothes pegs clipped to the face.
Oh my.
We're not talking about, you know, a dozen pegs here. It's hundreds, maybe even thousands.
To the face.
All clipped on someone's face, you know? Ouch.
Yeah. Where does that drive come from? Is it purely physical endurance, or is there a psychological aspect to it? A need to test limits, to prove something, maybe even to just stand out from the crowd?
Yeah, and if pain tolerance is a factor, you know, imagine the dedication required for this one. Longest distance pushing a pea with a nose.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
I mean, even the image itself kind of makes you smile, right?
Totally.
But the sheer patience, the focus and face.
Like dedication. I mean, can you imagine?
It's pretty incredible. Do you think that kind of single-mindedness translates to other areas of life?
Well, I would have to think so. I mean, if you can push a pea with your nose for miles, I mean, think about what you could do with a real goal. It really shows that the power of, you know, setting your mind to something, no matter how unconventional it might seem, is really incredible.
Right. From pain and dedication, let's move on to a record that requires some seriously strange skills. Most straws stuffed in the mouth, no hands. I can barely fit like one straw in my mouth comfortably, let alone like a record-breaking number.
I know.
What kind of physical adaptations even allow someone to do that?
It's crazy, right? It's not just about mouth size. It's muscle control, you know, flexibility, maybe a strategic placement of the straws even.
Uh-huh.
And it makes me think of the other things around the world, like, you know, extreme body modification and stuff.
Yeah.
It seems that humans have always been fascinated with pushing the boundaries of, you know, what our bodies can do and how far they can go.
And speaking of pushing boundaries, how about this one? Most spoons balanced on the face. I mean, you're turning your face into like a human spoon rack.
A spoon rack.
Talk about testing the limits of balance and facial muscle control.
Yeah. It's a perfect example of, you know, a mundane object being used to do something completely extraordinary.
Right.
And if we, you know, connect this to the bigger picture, we see that, you know, there's a recurring theme in history, right? Humans, we like to turn everyday things into competitions, like even bed making.
Oh, yeah. The fastest time to dress a bed. Team. I've definitely wished for that kind of speed on some rushed mornings.
Yeah.
Why do you think we're so driven to compete, even in seemingly trivial areas? Is it hardwired into us?
That's a great question. Is it nature? Is it nurture? Is it a combination of both? It's so interesting to think about how deep-seated that desire is.
Yeah.
You know, to compete and win, even in things that don't really seem to matter in the grand scheme of things. You know, we've seen it throughout history, from the gladiators, you know, to modern-day esports. There's something about competition that just drives us.
From friendly competition to pushing the limits of human endurance, these next records are all about going to extremes. Most t-shirts worn at once, heaviest weight lifted with the eyebrows, and longest time spent in full body contact with ice. Like, talk about a trifecta of physical and mental fortitude.
It's really mind-boggling to think what the human body can withstand.
It really is.
Like, when you think about that ice record, you know, you have to consider thermoregulation. How does the body keep its core temperature stable under those types of conditions?
Right.
And what about the mental aspect of that? What allows someone to just sit there and be so uncomfortable for such an extended period of time? It's incredible.
It's like a glimpse into, like, you know, the science of willpower and pain tolerance. But then, completely on a different note, we have largest collection of navel fluff. I have to admit, that one made me laugh out loud.
Yeah, a little quirkier.
It's pretty out there.
But, you know, even beyond the humor of it, it opens up a really interesting conversation about the psychology of collecting, right?
Right.
Why are some people driven to amass these, what we might consider, you know, odd items? What is the meaning behind it all? I think it's worth exploring further, for sure.
From endurance challenges to these quirky collections, we're seeing like a full spectrum of human behavior here. And speaking of pushing boundaries, are you ready for a record that's as slimy as it is intriguing? I'm talking about most snails on the face.
Oh, here we go.
This one is a visual, right?
Oh, I can imagine.
It really highlights that sensory aspect of these records, you know? I mean, the sliminess, the slow movement of the snails, the feeling of them on your skin. It definitely taps into a different kind of tolerance.
A different kind of tolerance, for sure. I mean, some people, that would be their worst nightmare.
Yeah, I can see that.
But to others, maybe it's a challenge, something to conquer.
Absolutely. And, you know, it leaves us with a lot to ponder. The why behind these bizarre pursuits, the psychology of collecting, and the limits of human tolerance, you know, both physical and sensory. But before we go any further, let's take a moment to let all of that sink in. We'll be back in a flash to discuss even more mind-boggling records and, you know, what they reveal about us as humans.
Okay, we are back. And I got to say, I'm still kind of stuck on that last one. It's just amazing to think that, you know, out of all the things a person could dedicate themselves to, some choose to have their face covered in snails.
It really shows just how different we all are, doesn't it?
Yeah. What seems crazy to one person could be, you know, totally normal, or even like a point of pride for someone else.
It definitely challenges our ideas of what's normal or what's, you know, even worth doing. It makes me wonder about recognition, you know? Mm-hmm. Is it purely personal satisfaction, or is there like an element of wanting to be acknowledged for these records, to stand out, to be famous maybe?
It's probably a mix of things, right? For some people, it might be that thrill of pushing themselves, seeing what they're capable of. But for others, maybe it is about getting that recognition, having their talents or their, you know, tolerance for the unusual seen by the world.
So it's not like a one-size-fits-all explanation, you know?
Yeah.
Each person has their own reasons. It's interesting to think about all the different things that might be going on in their heads.
Definitely. And I think it's important to remember that these people, no matter how strange their, you know, hobbies might seem to us, they're driven by something, a passion, a dedication to something that, for whatever reason, really captures their attention. Whether it's, you know, pushing a pea with their nose or collecting a ton of navel fluff, there's a story there. A human story that shows us just how capable we are of passion and perseverance and, you know, just a little bit of weirdness.
Speaking of that eccentricity, one record that really made me think about collecting was, you know, the largest collection of navel fluff. Can you talk a little about what makes people want to collect things, especially when it's something most people would probably find kind of gross?
Well, collecting in general, it's a very human thing to do. I mean, throughout history, people have collected all sorts of things, from stamps and coins to, you know, art and historical objects. And the objects themselves might be totally different, but the reasons behind it, they often have some things in common. For some, it's about preserving history, holding on to something from the past. For others, it might be the beauty of the objects or the craftsmanship, you know.
So even a collection of navel fluff could be a way of expressing yourself, a way of finding meaning or making sense of the world.
Exactly. Collections are personal. They reflect the collector's interests, you know, their experiences, their sense of humor. And for some, the act of collecting itself, it can be comforting, a way to create order in a world that often feels chaotic.
It's like each item tells a story, not just about the object, but about the person who chose to keep it. And when you think about it that way, even a collection of something like navel fluff, it becomes a lot more interesting. It gives you a glimpse into who that person is.
Right. And it makes you question what we consider valuable, doesn't it? What one person might throw away, another might treasure. It's all about perspective.
From the really thought-provoking to the just plain strange, these records really do show you the huge range of human experience. But before we get too deep into philosophy, let's go back to the physical challenges for a second. We talked about that ice endurance record before, but I'm still curious about how our bodies can actually withstand extreme temperatures. Like, how do we stay warm when it's so cold?
Well, when your body gets really cold, it kicks into survival mode. Blood vessels in your hands and feet, they start to narrow, which reduces blood flow to the skin surface and helps conserve heat. And then there's shivering, right? That's your body trying to generate heat by making your muscles work. And what's really amazing is that with repeated exposure to cold, your body can actually adapt and get better at regulating its temperature.
So it's not just mind over matter. Our bodies are pretty amazing at adapting. And that makes me think about the people who push their bodies in other ways, like the most t-shirts worn at once. What kind of physical strain does that put on someone?
It's crazy to think about the pressure that many layers of clothing would put on you. And it's not just uncomfortable, it can make it harder to breathe and even affect your blood flow. takes a lot of endurance, but also a good understanding of your own body and knowing your limits.
We've talked about pain tolerance, dedication, strange skills, and even the psychology of collecting. But honestly, what's really impressed me is just how creative people can be. It's like these record holders are looking at the world and saying, what if? And then going for it, no matter how crazy it might seem.
I totally agree. And it reminds us that we humans are incredibly inventive. Even in something like the Guinness World Records, you see that desire to push the boundaries, to try new things, to do things that are unexpected.
It shows us that there's always something new to find, something to be amazed by. And maybe it even inspires us to be a little more curious, a little more open to the strange and wonderful things in our own lives.
I like that. So are you ready for a record that combines strength, precision, and a good amount of, well, facial flexibility?
Bring it on. At this point, I'm ready for anything.
All right.
So we've gone pretty deep into these wild Guinness World Records. What really stands out to you? What's the one that just sticks in your mind? The most fascinating, the weirdest, or the one that you just can't believe is real?
For me, it's not so much about a single record. It's more about what they all tell us about being human. Think about the ones that involve, pushing your body to the limit, the endurance records, the pain tolerance. It makes you think, right, like, did we evolve this way for a reason? Did these things help us survive? Or is it something else, like a drive to see just how far we can go?
That's a good point. Like at that longest time spent in full body contact with ice, I'm still amazed that someone can actually do that. What's going on there? Is it all willpower? Or does the body, change somehow to handle it?
It's probably both, I think. We talked about how the body can regulate temperature, but there's a mental side to it too. Reminds me of that pee pushing record. Yeah, it's physical, but it's also about focus, discipline.
Totally. That one really shows you what you can do when you set your mind to something, even if it's a little strange. Maybe we could all use a little of that pee pushing spirit.
I think so. Imagine putting that kind of energy into your goals, even if it's something small. If you keep at it, who knows what you could achieve.
And speaking of achievements, I still can't get over that straw record. Most straws stuffed in the mouth. How do you even practice for that? Is it all about how big your mouth is, or is there some kind of trick to it?
It makes you think about the techniques, right?
Yeah.
You can't just be stuffing them in. There's got to be a system, a way to position them, to stretch your mouth just right. Humans are adaptable, that's for sure. We can learn some pretty specific skills, even if they seem totally pointless sometimes.
And then there's that navel fluff collection. It's funny, but it also makes you think, why would someone collect that? What's the appeal of something that most people would probably find pretty gross?
Collecting is a funny thing. Some people are into it for the history or the beauty of the objects. Others like the way it makes them feel, the organizing, the categorizing. And then there are the people who love the strange stuff, the things that are different.
So even navel fluff can be like an expression of who you are. It shows what you find interesting, what you value. It reminds you that not everyone sees things the same way. What's weird to one person might be really meaningful to another.
Yeah, exactly. It makes you look deeper. It's not just about the object, it's about the person and their story.
We've covered so much in this deep dive, the physical stuff, the weird skills, the psychology of it all. But what really gets me is just how different we all are. It's like a celebration of all the different ways to be human.
Couldn't have said it better myself. These records are strange, they're funny, but they also show you how creative and how resilient people can be. They make you want to try new things, to see how far you can go, and to appreciate the weird and wonderful things about yourself and everyone else.
So one last thought before we go. If you could set any Guinness World Record, what would it be? What crazy thing would you put your mind to? Think about it and let us know. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and don't be afraid to push the limits of what's possible.